Have you ever spent hours reviewing your notes only to blank out during the test? You're not alone. That feeling of panic when information you swear you studied just vanishes from your brain during a crucial moment is a sign that your study methods aren't working. Let's talk about what most of us are doing when we study. Picture this. You're sitting at your desk, highlighter in hand, marking up important phrases in your textbook. Maybe you're recopying your notes to make them neater, or just reading the same chapter for the third time. It feels productive, right? You're putting in the hours, seeing the pages turn, watching your notebook fill up with highlighted text. The problem is, all that effort is mostly wasted time. Your memory is like a leaky bucket. Passive studying pours information in, but without proper reinforcement, that knowledge steadily drains away before you need it. When you highlight text, reread notes, or passively review material, your brain isn't forming strong connections with that information. It's like looking at a map of a city versus actually walking the streets. You might recognize street names, but that doesn't mean you can navigate the city without help. When you simply reread information, your brain takes a shortcut. It recognizes the words and thinks, oh, I know this already, but doesn't actually work to store that information in long-term memory. This recognition versus recall problem is crucial. Recognition happens when you see information in your notes and your brain registers familiarity. Recall, what you need during a test, requires retrieving information without prompts. Consider your phone contacts. You recognize hundreds of names in your contact list, but how many phone numbers can you actually recall from memory? That's the difference between recognition and recall in action. The research confirms this problem. Studies show retention drops to about 20% after just 1 week when students use passive methods like rereading. For every hour spent studying this way, you're only retaining about 12 minutes worth of information. Here's the neurological explanation. When reviewing information passively, you're not forcing your neurons to build strong connections. It's like trying to make a path through tall grass by looking at it instead of repeatedly walking through to flatten it. Your brain forms stronger neural pathways when you actively engage with material, retrieving it, using it, connecting it to things you know. This explains why cramming sometimes helps you pass a test but leaves you clueless a week later. Cramming pushes information into short-term memory just long enough for recognition on a test, but without stronger neural connections, that information quickly fades, like memorizing Spanish phrases for a test but being unable to order dinner in Mexico a month later. I used to think I was a good student because I could spend hours highlighting and rereading textbooks. My notes were color-coded, neat, and comprehensive, but when test time came, I'd freeze up on questions I swore I studied. It took years to realize I was confusing the feeling of productivity with actual learning. The personal frustration many of us experience with studying stems directly from what cognitive scientists have identified as an illusion of competence. This psychological phenomenon occurs when your brain gets satisfaction from recognizing information during review, mistaking that recognition for retrievable knowledge. It's comparable to watching a chef on TV and thinking, I could make that dish, versus actually cooking it yourself. Watching creates a feeling of competence, but the real test comes when you perform independently. This illusion of competence leads us to stop studying prematurely. We believe we've mastered material when we've only become familiar with it. It's like practicing a speech by reading it silently instead of rehearsing aloud. Completely different experiences with vastly different outcomes. Most of us were never taught effective study methods. The techniques we use, highlighting, rereading, making elaborate notes, are often passed down from equally uninformed teachers, parents, or peers. We're all playing tennis with incorrect form, wondering why we can't improve. Although learning science has advanced significantly in recent decades, this knowledge rarely reaches most classrooms or study guides. Research in cognitive psychology has revealed much about memory, yet most students still use outdated techniques. One revealing study asked students to predict their retention after using different study methods. Students consistently overestimated how much they'd recall after rereading, while underestimating recall after self-testing. Our learning intuitions are often completely backward. There's also something satisfying about the aesthetics of studying. Color-coded notes and organized study guides look impressive and photograph well for social media. But attractive materials don't automatically translate to knowledge. Think about how often you've reorganized your study space instead of actually studying, or spent time choosing perfect highlighter colors. We sometimes confuse the appearance of studying with genuine learning, like buying expensive workout clothes but never exercising. The learning myths holding you back. You know how we just talked about reorganizing your study space instead of actually studying? Well, the fancy Instagram word might be the least of your problems. What if I told you that the learning style you've identified with your entire life is about as scientific as your horoscope? And worse, it's actively putting a ceiling on how much you can actually learn. Think about it. How many times have you said, "I'm a visual learner," to explain why you prefer diagrams over text? Or maybe you've claimed to be an auditory learner who remembers lectures better than readings? I used to say this all the time. But here's the thing. Despite how intuitive it feels, the science says that's actually not a thing. This whole idea of learning styles has been completely debunked by decades of research, yet somehow, this myth is still everywhere. Teachers plan lessons around it, students identify with these labels, and educational products market to these supposed styles. The research is clear. Scientists have tried repeatedly to find evidence that matching teaching methods to someone's preferred learning style improves outcomes, and they haven't found it. They've looked for over 30 years, and instead of confirming the theory, they've proven it wrong. What works best is using different approaches based on what you're trying to learn. The problem with believing you're a visual learner is that it becomes a self-imposed limitation. If you think you can only learn effectively through diagrams, you might avoid methods that could actually work better for certain subjects. It's like showing up to a toolbox with only a hammer when sometimes you need a screwdriver. Another persistent myth is that we only use 10% of our brains. Total nonsense. Brain imaging studies show nearly all regions of the brain active during various learning activities. Different tasks activate different patterns, but there's no vast, untapped 90% just sitting there waiting to be accessed. This brain myth creates unrealistic expectations. Students think they have enormous, untapped potential. They just need to unlock somehow. It leads people to chase quick fixes instead of putting in the consistent work that actual learning requires. It's like expecting to find a secret passage in your house that doubles your living space when really you just need to organize what you already have. Connected to these is the multitasking myth that most of us believe. The idea that you can effectively study while checking Instagram, sending texts, and having Netflix on in the background is simply false. A 2016 study found that students spent a third of instructional time doing non-academic activities like playing games or shopping online, all while believing they were still processing the lesson. Your brain isn't handling multiple tasks simultaneously. It's rapidly switching between them. Each time you switch, there's a cognitive cost. You're never fully focused on either task, which means you're doing both worse than if you concentrated on one thing at a time. Think of it like trying to have two separate conversations at once. You'll miss important parts of both. A 2021 study demonstrated this clearly, finding that listening to music with lyrics while studying vocabulary creates an interference effect. Your brain struggles to process language from two sources at once. The result? Multitasking can reduce learning effectiveness by up to 40%. Imagine studying for 3 hours, but only getting the benefit of less than 2. That's what happens when you're constantly switching between your textbook and TikTok. Why do these myths persist if the science has debunked them? For one, they feel intuitive. If I enjoy diagrams more than reading text, it's easy to conclude that I must learn better that way. There's also comfort in these myths. It's easier to say I'm just not an auditory learner than to admit I need to work on my listening skills. Labels give us an excuse to avoid challenging ourselves in areas where we're weaker. Simple explanations are satisfying. It's easier to believe in a single learning style than to accept that effective learning is complex and requires different approaches for different situations. Educational companies also profit from these myths, selling specialized study materials and programs claiming to access that mythical 90% of your brain. The good news is that understanding these myths is liberating. Instead of limiting yourself to one approach, you can choose the best method for what you're trying to learn. Visual aids might work great for understanding spatial relationships, while verbal explanations might be better for abstract concepts. And instead of multitasking, you can focus deeply on one thing at a time, knowing you're getting the full benefit of your study session. It's like upgrading from dial-up internet to high-speed fiber. Suddenly everything works better. This doesn't mean you can't listen to music while studying. That 2021 study specifically found issues with music containing lyrics in a familiar language. Instrumental music might actually help some people focus by providing background noise that blocks out distractions. Active